even when they're running, on the run, disappearing. And for multiple days, they're getting contact back to their family. They may not call mom and dad, but a lot of them would call a sibling or something, say, hey, tell mom and dad I still hate them, but I'm not dead. They're not, that cruel to their parents. But any one of them could theoretically cross paths with the next Tommy Lynn Says, or the next railway killer, or the next Sam Little, or something like that. Someone just blowing through your town, the worst happens.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, Missing Persons 101 with Detective David Hester, Part 1 of 2. Brought to you by Hero Industries, designing and manufacturing uniquely branded products for first responders, government agencies, and corporations worldwide since 2000. Welcome back, true crime fans, to the Murder Police Podcast. I am Wendy.
And I'm David.
Today we are going to be hearing from Detective David Hester about missing persons. David, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this?
Next two episodes are going to be just a primer on missing person investigations to let the listeners know what it's like to investigate these. Our guest, David Hester, is going to take us down the world of investigating missing juveniles and runaways, which is a complete type of investigation unlike any other. What I want the audience to think about is that 4 of our previous cases actually started out in some way as missing person cases, so they should go back and listen to those. That would be the murder of Haley McCone, the murder of Umi Southworth, the murder of Michael Turpin, and the murder of Alex Johnson. Each one had a different twist and turn and context. So with that, let's go ahead and join the interview with David Hester and learn about missing person cases.
All right. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. Today we will be discussing missing persons with Detective David Hester, formerly with Lexington Police Department. David, how are you today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming to talk with us. Other David, how are you?
Doing great. I love getting the opportunity to sit down with David because we worked together for many years back at the PD. And this is another one of those good educational podcasts that we're going to give because we're going to start issuing out episodes on missing persons and unsolved cases, which we haven't done until now. And I wanted to give the audience an idea of what a missing person case is and how they're investigated, what the real ins and outs of that is. And David is going to specialize because he worked a lot with the runaways and the missing juveniles at the police department, which is a whole different ball of wax than adults. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yes, me as well. Well, David, why don't you start with telling us a little bit about your career, what got you interested in law enforcement, and a little bit about working missing persons.
All right. Well, I started with the Lexington Police Department in 1997. I spent about 7 years on patrol, starting out as most police officers do in that area. I worked mostly on the north and the east side of Lexington. Then in 2004, I interviewed to become a detective with the what was then called the Family Abuse Section. It's now called the Special Victims Section in the Lexington Police Department, to become a detective with the Crimes Against Children unit. The Special Victims Section is divided in Lexington into 2 units, Crimes Against Children, which investigates personal crimes against individuals under the age of 18. So we would investigate anything from a simple assault all the way to homicide, but most of the cases in that, unfortunately, were either physical or sexual abuse type cases. From 2004 to 2007, I was a general detective which meant that I was catching any of those kinds of cases, again, from simple assault all the way to homicide. And then in 2007, I became Lexington's first Internet Crimes Against Children detective. I was the part of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force at that time, sworn as a special deputy U.S. Marshal under the authority of the FBI so that I could investigate and place charges in federal crimes as well as state crimes, mostly involving child pornography offenses, but also cases of internet luring, that kind of thing. I did do some of the undercover stings back in the day before Dateline pretty much ruined it for everyone with their stings all the time and made it much more difficult to catch fish, as it were, there. I did that from 2007 until 2010. And then I transferred from the Crimes Against Children to the other unit in the Special Victims section, which is the Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Unit. That unit is charged with investigating, as it says, obviously domestic violence, but also sexual assault cases involving adults. It also includes an elder abuse detective that follows up on crimes, particularly against elderly victims, mostly financial in those type situations, but also abuse and nursing home issues, that kind of thing. So I worked there in that unit from 2010 to 2014 when I transferred back to Crimes Against Children, again as a general Crimes Against Children detective. And then in 2015, I took over as the missing juvenile and runaway detective, which was one of the two specialized positions within the Crimes Against Children unit. I'd already done the ICAC detective, so I did missing persons and finished out my career there, retired in 2019.
Let me ask real quick, what got you interested in going into investigations? What drove you into there?
Well, I knew that as a pretty young person that I wanted to be a police officer and I wanted to be a detective. I had a couple of incidences growing up, particularly in high school, where a teacher of mine was sexually assaulted. That was about my junior year of high school. And seeing how that situation played out got me interested in becoming a personal crimes detective. So I went to college to study law enforcement, criminal justice, first in South Carolina at Charleston Southern University. But while going through the bookstore there, I realized that most of the textbooks were written by professors at EKU. So after my freshman year, I transferred to Eastern Kentucky University and began pursuing my criminal justice degree there. When I was in the middle of my junior year, people were telling me you have to apply multiple times to become a police officer anywhere. So you've got to go through the testing process a whole bunch. So I thought, well, I don't need a job yet. I'll test just to see what it's like and get that under my belt. And instead, they offered me a job. So at age 21, I was the youngest in my academy class. I started Lexington Police Academy in June of 97. Then from there, I, like I said, did my time learning how to be a good basic police officer, which has to be done at the patrol level, and then began interviewing for a position and was eventually picked for the Crimes Against Children position.
What a motivator. And not only just being an investigator, you had a path that you wanted to get into the personal crimes business. That's interesting, too. We're recording this in 2021. It's kind of ironic that they told you back then you had to take a test several times. I think pretty much right now, if somebody has a pulse, they'll take them. It's become a whole different hiring event.
It is. Things in the last few years have made it very difficult to find good police candidates. Back in the late 90s when I took my test, I mean, we had over 1,000 people take the written test. I'm hang out with a lot of the guys who do the background investigations for Lexington. And I mean, they're having less than 200 take the test total over multiple testing dates and picking a class out of that. I mean, you just don't have the numbers anymore. And it's a problem across the nation. You see it all over.
It's sad. because it's still, I know there's a lot of turmoil, but it's still a fantastic career. I'd have to tell anybody I enjoyed, even on the worst day, I enjoyed mine. So that's a pretty neat motivator to go into it. And that's interesting, too, about being sworn in at the federal level, is that to be able to have that dual certification or jurisdiction would probably be a way to put it, too. I don't think people are aware of how that works. I'm sorry that Dateline took away the cases on luring. I remember those shows, though. They were a little over the top, and that's when you take something that's serious and turn it into entertainment, kind of tends to ruin it.
Well, David, why don't you tell us what specifically makes a person missing, whether it's from an adult or a child? Are those things the same that qualified them as missing, or what is it that is the deciding factor that this child or this adult is in fact missing?
Well, with juveniles, it's much easier. Essentially, if a kid is not somewhere where their legal guardian, parent usually in that situation, knows or intends for them to be, then technically they are missing. So whether it's for, just a few minutes or whether it's for a few days or even longer, if your kid is not where you told them to be or where you expected them to be, they are theoretically missing as far as what can be done as far as taking missing persons reports and following up on them. For adults, the situation, of course, changes because adults do have a greater expectation of privacy and the ability to go and do as they please. So while you can still report an adult missing with relatively little information other than you just don't know where they are and they won't contact you, they're not going to be followed up on. They're not going to be investigated usually by law enforcement unless you have some reason to believe that that person is in some sort of danger or that there's been some sort of crime involving that person that has taken them, is what has caused them to be out of pocket to where no one can find them.
And I think that's what I wanted to talk about, was how different that was. One, on the juvenile side, is that virtually everybody goes in quickly. And when I say go in, let's go ahead and talk about that through the National Crime Information Center system, NCIC, where they go, which makes that information available to everybody. They go in quickly. But you're right, with the adults, I think that's where it gets a little tricky and frustrating for some people. The entitlement to freedom and the fact that people do make choices to not show up or be known where they're at sometimes, and that makes it difficult. Did it cause a lot of frustration with the families if they try to report and it doesn't feel like the police are grasping that?
Oh, absolutely. It can be very frustrating, particularly when dealing with juveniles when it's the first time that it's happened. As we kind of discuss it, we can explain how a lot of juveniles we're dealing with are multiple habitual runaways, frequent flyers, if you will, may run away multiple times in a year, that kind of thing. And a big part of my job was getting parents of these kids that were troubled through the first couple of times to understand the limitations of what the justice system could do to correct the behavior, and also what your kid is going through and how it was most likely going to resolve itself.
I know with adults, oftentimes when I watch some of the shows that I watch, I'm always saying to David how, oh my God, they're missing. And David often will say, well, sometimes they just don't want to be found. They're not missing, they're just gone. And they choose to be, quote, missing, but they're not missing. Have you encountered many of that people maybe just don't want to be involved in the life they're in anymore? And they start out as missing, but they're really just living in Los Angeles because they don't want to be bothered with the life they had here. Do you have a fundraiser coming up? Putting together an event and need something to help market it? With the holidays approaching, do you need gift ideas for your company or organization? Hero Industries has you covered. Hero is known for their cute and adorable canine hero plushies and their stunning challenge coins, but that's not all they have to offer. Hero also offers custom bottle openers, lapel pins, cigar cutters, tactical teddy bears, and custom badges. Any logo, any badge, any size, any shape. You pick how you want it. Just send Hero your logo and how you want it to look, and Hero makes it happen. Hero's excellent customer service makes it easy for you to design your item and offers a variety of accessories to pair with your order. Hero Industries has been working with law enforcement, government agencies, and canine handlers throughout the U.S. since 2000 by providing top-notch service with amazing details and one-of-a-kind products. Check out Hero Industries on Instagram at hero_industries_inc or cruise their website at www.hero-industries.com.
That is something, of course, that happens. And again, it's more of a phenomenon dealing with adults because adults have that freedom. My experience mostly, of course, is with children, people under the age of 18 who, however mature one individual child may be, legally, they have no right to that kind of, to make that kind of decision and, to live however they want to without interference, the way an adult does. So in my experience, it was as a crimes against children, missing and juvenile runaway detective is much simpler. Whatever the child's reason for running away, going missing, is immaterial. It's a lot like Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive, and when he confronts Richard Kimball in the water pipe, he tells him he didn't kill his wife, and he says, "I don't care." Well, that's kind of how, as a juvenile detective chasing runaways, whatever their reason for running away, I don't care. My first priority is to find them and make sure they're safe. Now, in certain cases, there would be perhaps criminal activity, perhaps abusive situations that they were running from, and we would find that out and investigate that after the fact. But the first priority had to be locating them and making sure that they were going to be someplace where they would be safe. So that's kind of my experience and my take on it in dealing with juveniles.
Yeah, because with adults, and I think when I told Wendy that was when I had those cases, and this is what's hard for family members to understand. Let me see if I can get this without sounding offensive, is that I know that people worry when adults don't show up, but I'd be willing to bet that most of the adult missings that I had, by far almost all of them, were people who walked away from their life. It's difficult because you'll have a family say, well, he or she would never do this. They had 4 kids. He or she had 4 kids. They'd never walk away. And inevitably, you get to the basis of it, and they've moved on, and you locate them, and they're fine. They're in good health and everything, and they'll tell you, I really don't want anybody to know. I think it was Dr. Greg Davis, when we interviewed him on forensic pathology, talked about how maybe the media sexes this up and makes it more sexy, but he said that same thing with the death investigations, is that people are very suspicious of those, but only that small handful turn into everything, which I think makes it difficult. When you're investigating these, is you get into that whole thing of balancing where to look for where that actually is going to be a problem and advance it through. I was looking real quick just to let people know, too, when we talked about NCIC, that the requirements for somebody to be entered are pretty simple. The person that is to be entered as an adult has to have a proven physical or mental disability. They're missing under circumstances indicating they may be in physical danger. They may be missing after a catastrophe. And I don't think people really knew that the NCIC does that. So if you have, for example, a condominium collapse in Florida, or a bombing, is that one of the standard practices going on in the background is that they're gathering a list of people to put in the NCIC until they are located. The other things that they come into is they are missing under circumstances indicating their disappearance may not have been voluntary, or coerced, kidnapped, unlawful imprisonment type things like that. Or they file back into David where they're under the age of 21 and don't meet any other criteria. And then the last one is that they're 21 and older, don't meet any of the criteria, but are for whom there is a reasonable concern for their safety. So that leaves a little wiggle room to get them into the system. Just wanted to cover that a little bit too. But coming back to what Wendy said, is that's the balance that I think we have to find, is that when they become the squeaky wheel or when there's a real threat. Some of the cases that we've covered on the podcast so far started out in some context as a missing person case. The murder of Haley McComb, the 13-year-old girl, was, and I'll drop this back in your lap again, David, because I think that if I was doing the juvenile runaways and missings, that's the case that turns into that.
Absolutely. I was with the police department, Lexington Police Department, when that happened in 1999. I worked the other side of town, so I didn't have any direct involvement myself in any aspect of the case, but I knew what was going on from being part of the department and what had happened and all of that. When I became the missing person or missing juvenile and runaway detective, my one prayer was to let me get through this to retirement without catching the next Haley McComb, because, that case is an absolute storm of just what could go wrong. I mentioned before, that we have, and to get into the numbers a little bit, the vast majority, 90+% of the juveniles that are reported missing are runaways. They're not kidnapped. They're not coerced into leaving. They leave of their own volition, knowingly, of their own free will, make the decision themselves to go. And of that, most of them, the reports that are taken in a given year would be of multiple habitual runaways, kids that have run away many times over the course of their childhood or over the course of a year. And Haley was, in fact, one of those. She had run away multiple times. And she always came back. Or, even when she was running away, she was running to her grandparents' house. So you talk about, in the number of cases coming across your desk, when you see that one, is right. It's a kid who has done this before, who always comes back in a couple of days. And when she does run away, she's running away to grandma's. I mean, how dangerous is that? The problem is that she just happened to cross paths with Tommy Linsells, the almost stereotypical drifter coming through. And, in his telling of it, she kind of approached him to bum a cigarette. We have, his word for that at this point. But she basically got struck by lightning is a way to look at it. She obviously was not planning to never come back again when she ran away. But because of the circumstances, because of whose path she just happened to cross, that's what happened. So I would have, these cases where I'd had kids who'd run away and be gone for, many times not even a full day, just, a few hours, 12, 16 hours maybe. And they're always coming back. They're always, off to grandma's, maybe at their aunt's, something like that. Even when they're running, on the run, disappearing, and for multiple days, they're getting contact back to their family. They may not call mom and dad, but a lot of them would call a sibling or something, say, hey, tell mom and dad I still hate them, but I'm not dead. They're not, that cruel to their parents. So, but any one of them could theoretically cross paths with the next Tommy Linsells, or the next railway killer, or the next Sam Little, or something like that. Someone just blowing through your town, the worst happens. So you go from a situation where, we have large numbers, 400,000 or more a year, that are entered into NCIC as missing juveniles that have reports on. You start, that's a lot. You start looking at it, and that's not 400,000 or so individuals. It's most of those, or at least half or so, are multiple reports. They're getting reported. If you broke it out, you might have half of that are actual individuals. 200,000, not 400,000 kids every year going missing, but only 200,000 that are doing this, most of them multiple times. You look at it further. In my experience, when I was the runaway detective, roughly 70% of the reports that were taken by Lexington police officers were resolved by the kid coming home themselves with no intervention by law enforcement. No, I didn't have to go find them at all. The patrol officer responded and took the initial report, and a few hours later got a call to go back to the house and take another report to clear them out of NCIC. And we never had anything more to do with it. I mean, so you have this again. We're shrinking the number even more. Most of the time, they're going to come back on their own. From there, they show back up at school. So Division of Law Enforcement, Fayette County Public Schools Division of Law Enforcement would call and clear them out. Again, with no real intervention by law enforcement. And so that's even more. But then you would have potentially one that would turn into an actual tragedy. So you had to kind of walk that thin line between knowing that it's probably going to be okay and concentrating on, the cases that seemed the most potentially dangerous, I guess is one way to say it, versus the ones that you knew were probably going to come back in a day or so after you've been down this road multiple times with them. But you just don't know. So I managed to get through it.
What would make criteria for an Amber Alert? At what point do you call it that?
The criteria for Amber Alerts are very specific and they're very limited, and that is by design. The Amber Alert system is, of course, meant to be used when we have an endangered child who is missing. It originally started in the mid-90s in Texas. It's expanded to every other state. Ultimately, states set the criteria for Amber Alert, but there are best practices and guidelines that most states, including Kentucky, follow before the issuance of an Amber Alert. First thing to consider with Amber Alerts is there is one agency in each state that has the authority to issue an Amber Alert. In Kentucky, that's the Kentucky State Police. So the Lexington Police Department cannot issue an Amber Alert. The Jessamine County Sheriff's Office cannot issue an Amber Alert. They have to collect the criteria, submit it to KSP, then KSP decides whether to initiate the Amber Alert system. So that's the first thing to consider that many times parents don't understand, and sometimes patrol officers themselves don't understand, and they're like, oh, sure, we'll do this, we'll do that. You will do no such thing. KSP will. Now, KSP, if it meets criteria, will, of course, issue the Amber Alert. They are not trying to not issue Amber Alerts. They just have to meet criteria. The first criteria that must be met is that it must be an abduction. So a runaway, a kid who left voluntarily of their own accord without coercion or anything like that, does not qualify for an Amber Alert, period. It has to have been someone who is a child who was abducted. And all of these criteria, as I go through them, they are all ands. It's not ors. They have to meet all of these criteria to have an Amber Alert issued. The second is that the child must be believed to be in serious danger of serious physical injury or death. So we can have an abduction, and most abductions, from a legal standpoint, involving juveniles are actually parental abductions as opposed to stranger abductions. They're familial abductions. Most of the time in that case, the parent is not planning to hurt the child. They are trying to take the child because they believe, perhaps wrongly, that they are acting in the best interest of the child. For whatever reason, they no longer have custodial rights to that child. Their rights may have been completely severed, or they may have been modified for whatever reason. When they take off with the kid, they are wrong legally, but they're not trying to hurt their child. So that situation would not call, even though it's an abduction, if we don't believe that the abductor is going to hurt the child, it doesn't qualify for an Amber Alert. And now, if you're dealing with a stranger abduction, obviously, since you don't know anything about that person and the circumstances as to why they have chosen that child, it's much more easy to articulate that the child is in some physical danger. That's just a given when you're dealing with a stranger. But again, most abductions are not stranger abductions. They are family abductions. The next criteria is that we have to have information to give the public to help them find the child. So we may know the child may be abducted. We may know that the child was abducted by a stranger, but we don't know anything we don't have a description of that stranger. He was wearing masks and gloves, and we have nothing. We don't even know their race or gender. We have no vehicle description or anything. So we have no concrete evidence, no direction of travel to give the public. An Amber Alert cannot be issued. We want there to be something for people to be looking for. And if we don't know what that is, then we're not going to do the alert. The main thing with the Amber Alerts, and I've been through trainings over the years and, had, sat through presentations by some of the people who came up with it way back in the day. And they will say that their goal with the Amber Alert system is they did not want it to turn into a thunderstorm warning, where you issue a thunderstorm warning because they happen all the time. People don't pay attention. They want it to be more like a tornado warning. It's rarer. They're not issued until you've got more information, such as a spot of a tornado on the ground kind of thing. So they're more serious. So people will take those seriously and move to shelter, that kind of thing. It's the same with an Amber Alert. We don't want people to get, where they just tune it out because it's happening so often. If the Amber Alert system is activated, we want people to have something to look for and to know where that there might be a successful resolution of it. Otherwise, it won't be. But the main criteria, and the one that many parents, when their child has run away, don't understand, is that it has to be an abduction. If your child has left on their own accord, it's not an Amber situation, period.
I love the analogy of the thunderstorm warning and that's it, is that if we were to start flooding this with people, it would be a non-issue. People would glaze over it. I think there's other things they can do, like I've seen sheriff's offices and police departments maybe pump it out on social media, which is short of that, which is a good idea, but that same effect will happen, is that people will scroll through. Well, that's another 16-year-old that ran away. So that's a frustrating thing for people to understand, is that not everybody goes in, and there's not a text message or a highway sign that goes off unless those are met.
Well, and I think also, not that golden alerts aren't important. That's going to be my next question to you as well. But I think when most people hear that a little child is missing via abduction, or somebody left their car running in a gas station and it had a child in the back of it, whatever the circumstance is, I think for the most part, community people come together when they know there's a child missing. And I mean, I would certainly hope that they do, but it just seems that when you see the golden alerts, I'm sure people still take heed to those as well, because ultimately someone's loved one's missing. But I think when that Amber Alert started years ago, it just seems like everybody wants to pitch in and help find the missing child.
And when we talk about Amber Alerts and golden alerts, we are dealing with two separate systems. Amber Alert is a national system. So if we are activating an Amber Alert, it's not just Kentucky. The information is going out nationwide through partners in the media and all that. Golden alerts is what we use in Kentucky. Some states call it silver alerts, are generally for adults who may have some sort of medical condition or mental disability, something like that, perhaps age issues such as dementia, that place them in personal danger to themselves. Those are state activations. And the entities that get notified in an Amber Alert versus a Golden Alert are very different. The Golden Alert is going to be pretty much confined to your state, your jurisdiction. If you're in some place where you've got, states coming together like Northern Kentucky, it might be going to multiple states. But generally, it is localized as opposed to nationalized. The other thing about it is that any agency can request or issue a golden or silver alert. It's not restricted the way Amber Alert is to just one entity like the state police is here. Lexington can issue a golden alert for people in Fayette County. And it's partnerships with local media that golden or silver alerts are working with, as opposed to the national push with the national media, the highway signs, and all of that with an Amber Alert.
Well, David, I know we've talked about the golden alert, the Amber Alert. Why don't you tell us about sex trafficking? I know that as of late, that's something that's kind of come up and people talk about it more. Have you dealt with sex trafficking? Is that something that is inclusive of all ages, or how does that work? Hey, you know there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about the presenters, and much, much more. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed captions for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police Podcast and you will find us. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast from. Make sure to subscribe to the Murder Police Podcast and set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.